Welcome and good morning. As you notice, Mary Peltola is not here. She got called away to the House floor. So she will not be participating in the candidates forum. She hopes to be able to beam in as a representative for just a couple moments around 12:15. So we'll be able to hear her. She sends her regrets to not be able to be engaging in the conversation of these issues that are very near and dear to each of you. I want to thank both the candidates for being here. You both are engaged in public service and have a long list of accomplishments, and we thank you for all you've done for Alaska and for participating in this annual meeting that has been well attended both here in the room and online. We do have media present, and we look forward to interacting with you both over the next hour. We've asked those that are gathered here to forward questions. We've got a few that are already on the cards that I have in front of me. They will be filled out by the audience, and we have runners that are going to be, well, Sarah's got duty today, so as you have one, raise that, and she will bring that forward to me, and we will ask them for as long as time allows. Each candidate will be provided an opening statement for up to 3 minutes, and we will do that in alphabetical order, and then we'll rotate the order of response throughout the next hour for Q&A. We've asked each candidate to limit their answers to 1 minute. Their depth of understanding could probably go on and on and on and on. The real skill set is delivering that message in 60 seconds. So there'll be their pop quiz test. There'll be some flexibility if we need to for clarification. We'll also allow time at the end of the hour for closing statements in the opposite order as well. So we've got a timer that is in front. Robin, can you, Mr. Begich, you can see that? Governor Palin, can you see the timer there through the camera? Excellent.
Perfectly.
So, all right, so we will go from there. And just thank you. So opening statements alphabetically. Mr. Begich, you have the floor. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you for hosting this event. It's great to be back in Ketchikan. I've been down here several times during this campaign. You know, Southeast Alaska is a very special place. For me, it's a very special place for Alaska. You know, and I tell folks all over the state, I sort of evangelize you, right? Because if you don't have an opportunity to be in Southeast, you don't have an opportunity to represent Southeast and understand all the various opportunities that there are down here, whether that be mining or fishing or tourism or timber. Southeast Alaska provides a tremendous source of wealth and opportunity for the entire state of Alaska. My name is Nick Begich III. I am one of those Begiches, as you would probably guess. I'm from the state of Alaska, but grew up down in Florida with my grandparents on my mom's side. And my parents split up when I was at a very young age, and I was raised down there, raised Republican, and we ended up going to Baylor University, got a degree in business with a focus in entrepreneurship. Worked for a little while as an investor relations analyst for a publicly traded company. It was an interface between executive management and Wall Street analysts that covered the company. And as I like to say, I thought I was doing pretty good. I was about 21, and I asked my girlfriend's dad if we'd get married. He said no. He said, "You're going to have to get a master's degree if you want to marry my daughter." So, you know, I was committed to marrying her, so I went back and got my MBA. And we are married and have been married for about 19 years. We have one son, Nicholas. I told my wife, I said, look, only one request before we get married. If we ever have a son, his first name's Nicholas, you can name all the other kids. And we just had one son. So I'm a business owner. I've been involved in the technology industry for the last 20 years. I own a software development company. We are global in scope. We help predominantly startups, so I have a really strong place in my heart for early stage companies and new business creation. I believe that the resiliency of Southeast has demonstrated that the people of Southeast Alaska have the ability to pivot and to create new industries where no industries were there previously. I'm excited about the opportunities that you provide to the state, and I look forward to being an evangelist for you, not just through Alaska, but down in D.C. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
Thank you so much, and I, too, appreciate and thank you for hosting this, and I'm glad that you have so many participants. That's very encouraging. I first got involved in politics over 30 years ago. Started out PTA, PTO in my hometown of Wasilla, and then I've been a city council member for 2 terms, a mayor for 2 terms. In Wasilla, it's a strong mayor form of government, so you're actually the city manager, and then chairman of our Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, regulating oil and gas, and then governor, and then the first female nominee for the GOP ticket, vice presidential seat. And my roots are in Southeast Alaska. My first 5 years, so foundational. My first 5 years were spent in Skagway. My parents moved up to teach school and to coach. And my dad, in the summer times, he worked on the railroad. We love visiting friends still in Southeast Alaska all these years later. My house is in Skagway is on the National Historical List. You know, it's got that cool plaque in front, and I've done the Skagway to Whitehorse relay a couple of times, and each time I go back and get to, you know, recall a lot of those great memories in Skagway and riding the ferries and riding the railroad, and that foundation has really allowed a great perspective on what it takes to fund and to produce well with the railroad, with the all of our maritime vessels, all of the ferries that you are so reliant on there. And I'm just really thankful for that foundation. I've raised my kids, all 5 of them, and my kids, like many of you, my kids are my world, raised them all here in Alaska. And I'm running for our children, all of our children, for the future of Alaska, the future of America. It's time that Alaska come into her own, where we have primacy. We're allowed to develop our God-given resources in order to secure and make sovereign our state, but also the nation. The nation will be looking to Alaska, knowing that we are the Fort Knox of this country. We have the mining, we have the timber, we have the fisheries, we have the oil and the gas and the rare earths and all that. We just need that allowance. We need a fighter to fight for that allowance to responsibly and ethically develop those resources. The country will be relying on Alaska. So we have to make sure that we do it right. And Alaskans do it right. It was an honor to be the governor of this state. And, you know, I would really like to work for Alaska in Congress.
Thank you so much. And we'll stay with you for the first question. Ferries were first for Southeast Conference in 1958 when we were formed, and it's a passion of ours. It's part of the fabric at every level in our region, as you both know. However, there's one-time federal funds available currently for the ferry system. It's kind of a twofold question. Would you advocate for continued federal funding for marine transportation and to help focus the federal agencies to deliver program funding as intended, and maybe how you would make sure that happens? But if you could speak to your prioritization of federal funding and support for marine transportation, please. Governor Palin.
Mm-hmm. I will support continued federal funding for the marine transportation, for that marine highway. Again, there's a soft spot personally for me with this issue, but even more importantly, government's role should be very, very basic. It's pretty simple what government is in place for. Federal government is to protect our individual rights and is for national security. States should have more say in what it is that they do, what it is that they do with federal funds that are passed through. Pass-through funds that come to Alaska, yes, a priority will be to make sure that the marine transportation system is up and running efficiently and effectively. Government should be about infrastructure, roads, water, sewer. That's what I did as the manager of this city for many years. That's what I was known for, is prioritizing that, and the marine highway fits right in there. I absolutely am convinced that the private sector can do everything else right, but government, roads, water, sewer, and marine transportation is a road.
Thank you. Mr. Begich.
Well, I'm a very strong supporter of the Alaska Marine Highway System. as a mechanism for connecting the communities of coastal Alaska generally and specifically Southeast Alaska coastal communities. It is a highway. And I was the co-chair for Don Young's 2020 campaign, and it was something that he reemphasized, not just here in Southeast, but throughout the state, that the Alaska Marine Highway System is a marine highway and should be funded in a manner consistent with that. I believe that in order to ensure that the marine highway system is adequately financed and funded, we need to make sure that it's a permanent part of the way that our highway funding formula is managed and maintained at the federal level, and should I be elected, I will work to ensure that that is the case.
Thank you. And staying with you for the next question, our tribal partners bring substantial value to our economy and have a very special government-to-government relationship at the federal level. How would you strengthen those opportunities and partnerships?
Well, last night I was encouraged to see that Hoonah was the community of the year in Southeast Alaska. And I think that what has happened in Hoonah can happen and is happening throughout Southeast Alaska, and that's a tribal relationship that is a government-to-government relationship and a great example of a public-private partnership that has advanced the interests of Southeast Alaska. I think that we are blessed with the unique opportunity in the state to have so many strong tribal governments and organizations here, and we should absolutely be taking advantage of that special status. That special status provides us with accelerated access to development projects through accelerated permitting and additional financing vehicles that are available through the federal government. I think that is an untapped resource that we need to continue to work on developing, and it will help us to develop the full economic potential of the state.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
Yes, strengthening the opportunities and the partnerships with the Alaska Native tribal nations. That's very important to me. We do that by listening and engaging in regular and meaningful dialogue. We have to ensure that they're proactively a part of the process to have that voice. Federal policies, especially, they have tribal implications. Another aspect of this that's near and dear to my heart is being a strong part of Bristol Bay. All these years, my kids are Yupik, Eskimo of the Chugiyung tribe, and that part of them that is Native, it always is reminding me how unique Alaska is because of the activities and the involvement of the Indigenous people. We should all be so proud of that. And we should never discourage it. So yes, encouraging opportunities and partnerships, very important. We have to listen, we have to engage in the regular and meaningful dialogue.
Thank you. And staying with you, Governor Palin, the potential value of minerals in Southeast Alaska here in the Tongass have been estimated at over $1 billion. How should the federal government prioritize mapping these out and creating an inventory for these deposits?
That's a great question, because ethical and responsible, safe, healthy development of our natural resources, that's my top priority for the state of Alaska. If I'm in Congress, that's what I'm going to be fighting for, because it's the future of Alaska to make sure that we're able to map out and to develop. And yeah, the billion-dollar industry that we have here and the potential for so much more. In fact, I beg to differ that it is only $1 billion. The federal government needs to get out of the way, though, and let Alaskans do what we do best, and that's manage our own resources and follow our state constitution that says it's the people who own the resources underground. Okay, it's oil companies, mining companies. They have the right to develop, but it's the people of Alaska. So we need to pay attention to what goes on with our resources. My concern about getting the federal government involved is that, well, it's eventually going to be used against us as an excuse to deny Alaska access to our resources. So we have to be very cognizant of that the federal government needs less say than the state.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
Well, I would challenge the assumption that it's only $1 billion in the Tongass. $1 billion in mineral resources is actually a really small estimate, and I think part of the reason that they've estimated it at $1 billion is because they haven't done that inventory. I think the federal government has a responsibility to determine what is the asset value of the lands that they are presently holding, and to catalog what is there, right? I mean, we have nearly 50 of the 50 critical minerals on the critical minerals list in Alaska. We have rare earths down here in southeast Alaska. And we probably have substantial deposits of those critical minerals and rare earths in addition to base metals and precious metals in the Tongass. And it's important for the federal government to understand what that inventory is. I think that the federal government has a responsibility to catalog and inventory those assets and ensure that we have the ability to responsibly develop those assets here in the state of Alaska.
Thank you. Staying with you, is the U.S. national debt a problem to be addressed and prioritized? And if so, how would you address it?
That's a huge problem. That is a huge problem. And it's something I've talked about through the entire campaign ever since I got into this race in October of last year. The federal debt represents a major threat to the reserve currency status of the United States dollar. And what we've seen now is a $30 trillion and growing national debt that has been enabled through a profligate Congress, a Congress that continues to spend without any seeming constraint, and a Congress that seems to be disconnected from the fundamentals of economics. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've printed about $4 trillion of new money that has been printed by the Federal Reserve Bank. They've shot that money through the economy, and as a result, we're suffering from near record high inflation, 40-year high inflation. The highest food inflation since 1979 as of 2 days ago. And so we absolutely have a responsibility as a Congress to manage our fiscal picture in a responsible way. That is not being done, and it is something that I will work strongly to do in the Congress.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
That is a great question because, yes, our national debt and deficit spending, that's like the biggest problem. Remember, so many people, we used to follow that debt clock, right? That was always clicking every time that Congress would spend another dollar that America doesn't have. And they print money out of nowhere with their quantitative easing practices and their fake debt ceiling that they just keep raising and raising. So it's frustrating to even hear Congress talk about a debt ceiling. We used to pay more attention to this. I still pay attention to this. That's why we need a common sense constitutional conservative in Congress to remind them, okay, we will hold purse strings for this nation. It's up to us to quit getting this nation further and further in debt. You know, we don't even know what the debt is. People say today, oh, it's $23 trillion. But then we also hear, no, because of unfunded mandates and obligations in the future, it's probably closer to $100 trillion. We don't have the money and we're gonna be owned by China if we don't change that up soon. It's gotta be Congress that changes it up.
Thank you. And staying with you, the next question is fisheries related. And it seems that international fisheries management issues have left Alaskans feeling kind of at the short end of the harvest. What would you do to ensure Alaskan fisheries have its fair share?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Alaskans do feel that we get the short end of the harvest. I was a commercial fisherman in Bristol Bay for many, many years, a set netter there on the Nushagak. And, I would see firsthand, even then, how Alaskans were at the short end of the harvest. The federal government is responsible for governing federal waters. They have an obligation to protect those waters, especially from foreign deep sea trawlers. They take our fish and they decimate the population before the fish can return to their spawning grounds. That, of course, decimates the future fishery. Alaskans are left to fight over the scraps. We're Alaska. We're the biggest. We're the toughest. We need to manifest that when it comes to policies that hurt us in our fisheries. The federal government has got to do their job. They will. If I'm elected to Congress, I'm gonna fight for that.
Mr. Begich.
Well, we do have a major issue in international waters, and we have an issue with international operators entering our own sovereign waters and accessing our fish populations, I think that we need to make sure that the Coast Guard is fully funded and that they maintain their mandate to ensure that they are interdicting vessels that are entering our waters and illegally. I think it's also important for us to continue to work with our Boundary Commission and make sure that the boundaries between the United States and Canada waterways are managed and maintained in a manner consistent with a sustainable harvest and sustainable maximum yield under the state constitution's sustainable yield clause. I think that's really important. So we've got to do a better job of working with our international partners, and we've got to do a better job of ensuring that those who are illegally fishing in our waters are properly interdicted and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
A follow-up question regarding bycatch for the fisheries, managed fisheries. Any solutions or insights on that topic, on that issue?
Well, I think that we absolutely need to continue to fund scientific research. That's without question. You know, there are a number of issues related to the stock variability that we see in the oceans, but bycatch is a massive issue, and it's not being talked about enough. We see this predominantly in the trawl fleet, and what they've been doing is some bad actors in that fleet that have sort of run up the scales, and we need to make sure that we have adequate representation that represents the diversity of user groups on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. I think that's important as well, so that every user group is properly represented and has a voice at the table when these policies are being determined in terms of what the bycatch thresholds should be.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
Man, have you ever seen this happen? It's tragic. It's sinful to watch what happens with those who waste that natural resource, our fisheries. It's absolutely tragic to watch this happen. And we need tougher regulation. We need spotters on the water. We need those who are out there seeing firsthand what's going on with especially foreign vessels. With the bycatch issue, and Nick's right, we don't talk about it enough unless you're a part of the fishery, it seems, unless you have that commercial fishing permit or your deckhand or something and you're out there watching it. But we need tougher regulation and we need some punishment. Typical government, federal government, all this talk about being tough, and yet then people skate by when they break a law, it seems like, especially out on the water. We need tougher regulation. We need to put the fear of God in those who would waste our resources. The federal government can do that, state too.
Thank you. And staying with you, two questions will kind of combine regarding fisheries and resources and native rights. How would you support the restoration of tribal fishing, hunting, and gathering rights in Alaska, and how you make sure the subsistence priority in ANILCA is honored? Governor Palin.
Yeah, and remember, in ANILCA, there are priorities laid out for the Indigenous people, and that's as it should be. Those who need the resource most should be able to harvest that resource, and especially those in tribal areas, out in our villages, when they rely on hunting and fishing for subsistence in order to put food on the table for their families. That's more important than, say, sport hunting, of course. So we have to follow ANILCA. We have to make sure that the rest of Alaska understands what our Constitution says about resources and what ANILCA says, what that agreement said. And again, I've already pointed out, near and dear to my heart is that bloodline that runs through my kids and now their kids. It's very, very important that we hold on to that and that we remember who got here first and we remember who is most reliant on those resources. That's rural.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
Well, I think ANILCA is being reinterpreted currently by the Biden administration as it relates to subsistence. And, we have a somewhat activist subsistence board in the state right now, and they are attempting to close off hunting rights that have been granted under ANILCA. I think it's important that all user groups be balanced. I think it's important that we potentially go back to ANILCA and look at some of the other implications of that legislation. That legislation closed off a great deal of the resources of Alaska, whether they be timber or mineral or even oil and gas in some areas. I think it's important that we recognize that that bill has restricted the growth and opportunity of the state. And as a private inholder of a property in Wrangell-St. Elias National Park, I'll tell you, ANILCA has quite a few drawbacks.
Thank you. A couple of workforce-related questions ahead for us. How would you support treatment for opioid and fentanyl addictions?
Well, I think that we need to go after the producers of these illicit drugs and physicians that overprescribe opioids. These are highly addictive substances. I will tell you, having traveled extensively throughout the world, there are many places around the world where the penalty for dealing these drugs is extremely high, all the way up to capital punishment. And what we have to start recognizing as a community is that people who manufacture and bring fentanyl into our nation's borders are actually responsible for murder. They are murdering people, and they're destroying families. And we need to take a very hard line on these drugs and those who would traffic them.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
Fentanyl is getting here because of the open borders, because of liberal Democrats in Congress who don't care about borders. And without a border, you don't have a country. That's one thing. But that's how these drugs are getting into America and are killing Americans. And fentanyl, is the cause of more deaths than any other in a certain demographic with our young people, and it's absolutely tragic. It's all about these open borders. I know that Ketchikan too has had a problem, a drug problem, and fentanyl getting there too. Every state now is a border state. We have to remember that. It's not just Texas. It's not just those areas that are literally physically on the border, but every state. And that's why we have to make sure those in Congress and those in the White House will secure our borders. It's tragic what's happening. And it seems like fentanyl is like a symptom, but it's a perfect example of what happens when Congress, when the White House doesn't give a flying flip about borders.
Thank you. We do an annual business climate survey, and we had 440 business leaders here in Southeast Alaska identify both housing and childcare as critical issues related to the economic recovery. How can the federal government assist on those topics? Governor Palin?
Well, I think that the federal government really shouldn't have a role in either housing or childcare. That wasn't a purpose of setting up the federal government. Other levels of government, creating safety nets, okay, we can talk about that, but the question is about the federal government. So if the federal government does anything, it should be limited to grants, perhaps, for Alaskans to take care of those needs on our own. Alaskans, we pay into the system. So if some of that is returned to us via grants, well, let Alaskans have say in it. Alaskans, yes, we need housing and childcare, but we should be free to meet those needs on our own terms. We're free, okay? And without strings attached from the federal government, without having to cater to the federal government, to the edicts and the pencil pushers, those bureaucrats in DC who want to tell us what to do in every aspect of our life, including how to raise our children. So federal government, sure, pass through a grant, but then get out of our way.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
So I think there are some things that the federal government can do to assist, particularly with the housing shortage that's happening in so many communities throughout Southeast, particularly here in Ketchikan. And I think one of those things is to support roads and bridge building, right? We have a tremendous source of land. It's just over the channel, right? If we had a bridge in Ketchikan to Gravina Island, maybe we wouldn't have such a problem with housing down here. And I will tell you, you know, when you see politicians try to score political points by canceling the projects that this community relies on, that should tell you everything about where their priorities sit. It's not with you, it's with them. Thank you.
Well, so happens the next question is, no. Do you support, I believe they're calling it congressionally designated spending at this moment, but earmarks? And if so, do you have one identified for the region that's come to your attention?
Well, so they've now relabeled these. They're called community development grants, I think. But it's an earmark by another name. I prefer block grants to the states. I think that the state is in the best position to make determinations about what is, how money should be spent locally. And so it's my view that if we're going to be sending money to the states from the federal government, that the local control is better. And so I'm not a supporter of the earmark process. I think that it distorts some of the federal spending problems that we addressed earlier, but I do believe in local control, and I do believe that the state and local governments are in the best position to determine what priorities are.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
Oh, and you asked for something specific regarding what we have in mind that we would do with these so-called earmarks. Mine would be put to good use with more fisheries research and more regulation and that punishment that needs to fall on the heads of those who are disobeying what it is that Alaskans need to develop that resource, our fisheries. But no, earmarks, absolutely not. Earmarks are a problem in Congress. It leads to the crony capitalism, to the favoritism, to the corruption in Washington, D.C., where, politicians just try to bring home the bacon to certain constituents in order to get reelected and reelected and reelected. Too many in Congress, as a matter of fact, because elections are every 2 years. That's what they live for. That's what they work for, is just to get reelected. So earmarks, no. Dollars pass through the federal government back to the states, according to what, in our case, Alaskans pay into. Yes, give us back the taxpayers' money, so that we can develop our state as we see fit.
Thank you. And staying with you, the tourism industry is finally back on its feet. The waiver that was received last year to the Passenger Services Act really made all the difference. That was achieved by the work of our delegation. It's been suggested to make that waiver permanent and have the ports compete with service and pricing competitiveness rather than a government mandate to stop in a foreign country. Do you agree with pursuing that waiver, and how would you approach this topic? Governor Palin.
This is the beauty of having been involved in politics and being elected so many times, local and state level. You understand that government mandating anything is bad for business. That's why, again, you need common sense, constitutional, fiscal conservatives holding the purse strings. I've always been a staunch supporter of the free market, and I believe competition is best. It's good for the tourism industry here in Alaska, especially. We're going to end up with nicer ports. We're going to end up with more tourists and more tax revenue for the state and for our local cities. It's win-win for everyone. And I would approach it just as Representative Don Young approached it. And this is why I didn't challenge Don Young when he was in office. I didn't try to oust him, to fire him, thinking that I would do a better job. Don Young did a great job, and in this respect also, and the Alaska delegation as a whole, by putting Alaska first. Alaska's economy should not be impacted by the actions of a foreign government. And yeah, that PSA waiver, it did make all the difference last year. We have to just make sure, again, that we have that sovereignty in making our own decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
Well, I'd like to challenge something that was just said. This idea that Governor Palin did not challenge Don Young. She literally introduced Sean Parnell when he had made his announcement running against Don Young, right? That happened. I think she's hoping that we all forget what happened. Maybe we forget what happened when she was governor. Maybe we forget what happened when she ran for vice president. Maybe we forget what happened in the ensuing years. But we're not going to forget. We're not going to forget. It's about the record, right? It's about the record. You know, at the end of the day, excuse me, I am speaking. You will have your opportunity to speak, Governor.
Calm down.
Thank you. At the end of the day, Don Young did something that had never been done before. His clout in the Congress allowed him to get unanimous consent. He had built relationships across the aisle. He did an amazing thing, and I would absolutely seek to continue the waiver for the PVSA. I think that we cannot put our nation or our state or our region in the whims of a foreign government. Thank you.
So staying with you, the transboundary issues are, we touched on the topic of sovereignty, resources. Transboundary issues is definitely a federal issue involving a foreign country. What do you think the federal government's responsibility is in that, and what role would you play in trying to unravel and address those issues in the watershed?
Well, I think the watershed is absolutely important. It allows us to maintain a sustainable, healthy fishing industry here in Southeast and throughout the nation. The Transboundary Commission, they have responsibilities that extend beyond fisheries. It's ensuring that we have healthy waterways, that we have transit between our two nations. They address issues in Alaska, but also in the Great Lakes and across, our our middle border, we'll say. And so the Transboundary Commission is important. I think that it's important for our representatives to ensure that we have healthy communication with our Canadian partners, and only through that relationship are we going to continue to develop the resources of Alaska in a healthy and sustainable manner, both in terms of fishing and in timber, and as it relates to minerals development as well.
It's very unique. Our relationship with our Canadian neighbors is very, very special and very close. And that's because the people of Canada, they're so much like Alaskans in northern Canada. You meet them and you feel like you're at home. You feel like you're talking to family because they too appreciate their God-given natural resources there, and they want to have a good relationship with us. It is so important. So that Transboundary Commission, it's so important that we have a voice in who those commissioners are. It's another nice thing about a foundation having been in office as an administrator, and you're appointing commissioners at all levels. It's so important that they understand, especially in our case, what the transboundary issues are. And with the watershed, with all of our fisheries, with timber, with all the transportation of our natural resources, just making sure that we have that great relationship with Canada, continuing that, but Alaska's interests always being put first. We have to make sure that the commissioners understand that.
Thank you. And staying with you, what would you do to support veterans' rights and benefits?
Oh, this is very, very important, and we're not talking enough about our most honored, our vets. My son, having served in the military, I see what happens when the government promises something, enticing people to join, to protect our country, to put their lives on the line, and then government backtracking when it comes to fulfilling obligations. Why is it that we have to do these private sector fundraisers all the time for our vets? Government should be paying out the benefits, and I don't even want to call them benefits. What is due these veterans? We need a fighter for our vets in Congress. We need to make sure in the headshed, in the White House, that they understand the responsibility that our troops, both past and presently serving troops, have taken upon themselves to make sure America is the freest and finest country in this nation. It makes me ill to see what the federal government especially does in terms of ignoring our vets' needs. I will do all that I can to fight and to win for our vets. And I appreciate so many vet organizations who have endorsed me also.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
I think that we need to make sure that we keep the promises that we've made to our veterans, whether that be retirement or whether that be high-quality health care. And so many times I hear from veterans who are concerned about the quality of the health care that they are receiving, the adequacy of that care comprehensively, right? From everything that you would normally consider to be health care all the way to mental health care. You know, we've learned recently that many vets during their time of service were exposed to chemicals in burn pits, and this is a major problem. It's something that that has been ignored for too long, and I think that we need to make sure that we're adequately compensating those who have been victims to exposure of these burn pits. You know, they have higher incidence of cancer and lung complications as a result of this exposure, and for the federal government to be walking away from these veterans is absolutely wrong in my view.
Thank you. Staying with you. Promises, promises, promises. What about the promises to the landless tribes?
Well, for those tribes that did not receive land allocations, I think it's absolutely important that the federal government honor the same agreement and commitments that were made to those that were provided with lands. I think that there are a variety of ways that that can be done. It can be done through lands. It can be done through other compensatory measures. It can be done through things like quota allocation, minerals deposits, and certain other mechanisms that provide an economic source of production for those landless tribes. I think that when you're thinking about what was the purpose of these land conveyances and these agreements, it was to create a source of wealth for a sustaining wealth for these communities, and we need to make sure that these communities have an engine to produce wealth of their own and develop economic opportunity for their people.
Governor Palin.
The landless tribes, they absolutely deserve the share of the resources, what is derived from the natural resource development opportunities in our state. I think that was inherently the intention of when Alaska became a state, and all the agreements that were made it was about equality, and it was about different areas of the state all being able to share in natural resource development. What needs to take place, though, is the feds getting out of Alaska to a greater degree. Biden has a 30 by 30 plan, if you guys have heard of it, and we need to fight against it. He wants to lock up 30% of federal lands by 2030. Well, look at Alaska already. We so suffer under the federal government. They have locked up a heck of a lot more than 30% of our lands, of course. So getting the federal government out of so much of our land, out of our acreage, and allowing equality, different tribes, different areas of the state to be able to access and to be able to develop. That takes the feds getting off our back on our side.
Thank you. And staying with you, the military's presence in Alaska is both strategic nationally and a major part of the Alaskan economy. The Navy has very little presence in Alaska, but has a small footprint nearby Ketchikan for sonar testing. Southeast Alaska's 1,000 islands in an Arctic state seems the perfect location for an expanded naval presence. How should the region work toward that, and what efforts would you do to prioritize towards that end?
Yeah, well, military is going to be a top priority for me, and the needs of the military will be met. So if the military tells me that there's a strategic value in expanding its presence in Southeast Alaska, and sitting here as a layman, as we all are, because none of us are elected to Congress, I'm not yet, we don't know yet exactly what the military needs in terms of expansion in Southeast Alaska. But as a layman, I would say, yeah, I would support Southeast Alaska being able to house and host and be able to support a greater military presence there. I'm going to be the loudest champion in Congress for the funding to make sure that Alaska continues to be the most strategically useful state in the union. I take a lot of heat for being honest and letting the country know, as I travel around the country and around the world, promoting Alaska and our interests, letting people know about our strategic location. I use the example of us being able to see Russia from Alaska because you can.
Thank you. Mr. Begich.
So I have long said that I believe with more than half the nation's coastline, Alaska does need a substantial naval presence. I would be a champion for having a naval base here in the state of Alaska. I think that's important. I think there are other things that need to be done as well. We've talked a lot about icebreakers. There's a little bit being done, but we have a great deal more to do to open up the waterways of Alaska and protect the waterways of Alaska. And, you know, the Coast Guard does a tremendous job on a very limited budget. I think that we need to look at how the Coast Guard is funded and ensure that they have the appropriate level of funding in order to pursue their missions. But I would like to see a larger naval presence in the state of Alaska. It's something that we have had in the past, and I think something that we are going to need well into the future.
Thank you. Staying with you, hydro is very, very important to Southeast Alaska, yet it's not recognized as a federally recognized natural resource, renewable resource. How would you work to rectify that, and do you support hydro as a renewable resource?
Hydro is probably the very best form of energy that you can have. There's virtually no waste whatsoever. There's tremendous opportunities to store the energy that comes off of hydro when you have excess energy through pumped hydro and other technologies that are emerging right now. Hydro has been transformative for the energy security of Southeast Alaska and so much of the rail belt as well. And you know, I would champion hydro in the Congress. I believe that it is the most renewable resource, and this idea that it's not is wrong-headed, right? And what we need to be doing more hydro, not just in Alaska, but throughout the nation. I think that it offers us energy security, the energy security that we seek. Right now, we see what's happening over in Germany as they went full alternative energy. Now they are completely reliant on the nation of Russia and the gas flows coming in from Russia. They have placed their national security in a foreign interest's hands because they failed to take care of their energy security. Hydro is a critical component of our nation's energy security matrix.
Thank you. Governor Palin.
I kind of beg to differ with how you prefaced this with we can't assume that hydro isn't recognized by the federal government. It is in a lot of aspects. Yeah, in some aspects it's not, and we need to educate bureaucrats and the population as a whole in what hydro represents and what hydro can produce, because man, that power of the water, it is the cleanest, greenest, renewable. And, you know, we're looking at all these other cockamamie plans going on in our nation for their green energy ideas. And it's just a lot of it, most of it's based on just crony capitalism and favoritism. It's all about money and control and power given to these renewable energy projects that don't go anywhere, of course, like Solyndra and others. But yeah, we do need to educate people more and more about the clean, green hydro, the power, the potential. Southeast Alaska is the example of that, how important it is and how efficient and effective it is in Southeast. But America needs to look at Southeast Alaska when it comes to hydro.
Thank you. And as we wind down here, got two very similar questions. Some have described the atmosphere in Congress as toxic partisanship. What are your plans to reach across the aisle and work with others not in your party? Governor Palin, it's with you.
My record shows that that's exactly what I do. When you serve in local office, it's not partisan. You have to work both sides of the political aisle, different ideologies, in order to get things done. The most responsible and responsive level of government is local. So having that foundation of understanding how it works and how it can work is so extremely important. And that kind of mentality needs to be brought to Congress. Even as governor, I work very well with the other side of the aisle. In fact, was able to find common sense constitutional conservatives in the Democrat Party and appointing them to positions that Alaska needs. No, it's very important that we're team players there in Congress, and that we are happy warriors, and that we can all work together for the good of the people, and put ego and put anger and put whatever chips on our shoulders, that we get rid of all of that in order to manifest a culture of workability, of work ethic, and of friendliness in Congress. Is for the people. They want that. They expect it. They deserve it.
Thank you, Mr. Begich.
Well, I think when you are in a state like Alaska with such a small delegation, 2 senators, 1 House member out of 435, you've got to work across the aisle. You've got to be ready to work with everybody on behalf of the interests of our nation and behalf of the interests of our state. And by the way, I don't think those are mutually exclusive ideas. I think that Alaska has the opportunity to solve so many of the challenges that our nation faces today. We've touched on several of them already. National security, mineral security, energy security. We have the answers. And the only way that those answers are going to be brought to bear is if we can convince not just one side of the aisle, but both sides of the aisle of the importance of Alaska. You know, we are disconnected. We know that. We are disconnected geographically from the rest of the country. It's important that the people that we send down there be effective ambassadors, making what I call the business case for Alaska. Why should the work be done here and not somewhere else in the world? I think I can make an effective case for you in the Congress, and I'll work every day on your behalf to build the relationships on all sides of the aisle necessary in order to do that.
Thank you. As we go to closing comments, remind you our region stretches and our attendance today stretches from Metlakatla in the south, Haines, Skagway to Yakutat and even beyond. But as you do your closing remarks, the 2 questions that have come in that are broad enough for you to incorporate is, will you campaign physically in Southeast during the remainder of the election? Will we see you again? And why should I vote for you? So if the timekeeper would add an extra minute onto the closing comments that allow you to weave that in, we'll go in the opposite order of our opening remarks. So Governor Palin.
Oh, thank you. And again, thank you so much, Southeast Alaska, for hosting this. Ketchikan, wonderful city, wonderful local government there. So appreciate all that you do for the greater good of Alaska, including hosting this conference. And yeah, campaigning throughout the state. You know, as a lifelong Alaskan, as the former governor of this state, and having served as the president of the Alaska Conference of Mayors, being able to travel to Southeast Alaska is so extremely important and impacting. The reason I'm running, I already told you, it's about the future. It's about our children. And that's all of Alaska, not just the big cities of Alaska, not just Fairbanks, Juneau, Anchorage, the Valley, but all of Alaska, including the little tiny villages and towns that I've just been blessed to have connections with. And let me just say, running for Congress, it's now or never for America. We have to start making better decisions, and there really is no alternative. America is that shining city on a hill. I say Alaska is the head of it, physically even, we're the head of it. Other countries look to America, and we're losing our way. And it is so important that we get back to constitutional, common sense conservatism to save this country. We need to get our house in order. And we've got raging inflation. Shoot, today, 6% mortgage rates were announced. A crash is coming. It's going to be worse if we don't get our house in order and if we don't have those fiscal conservatives in Congress holding the purse strings to make right decisions. So we've got raging inflation to deal with, and we have supply shortages, and we have officially entered a recession. Just a few weeks ago, it finally was designated a recession. And the stock market, it's crashing in a lot of respects. So we, being in the middle of this fake energy crisis that Joe Biden has caused, because our own president won't let us develop our God-given natural resources and is overseas asking foreign countries for their dirty, dangerous sources of energy to be produced for us, it's all absurd. The radical Democrats are out of control, and absolutely, we need to restore that common sense to Washington that people expect. Common sense seems to be an endangered species in DC. Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they're driving this country off a cliff. And if we don't slam on the brakes now, it's going to be too late. So yes, Southeast Alaska being so instrumental in the health and safety, sovereignty, solvency of Alaska translates also then into America's solvency and sovereignty. So yes, campaigning in Southeast Alaska, very, very important. Can't wait to get there again. And I do appreciate everybody, all the hardcore, hardworking Alaskans in the area who just have that work ethic and that being so conscientious of one another's needs, that as neighbors, as close, tight-knit communities take care of one another. It's so encouraging, and it's great examples, role models, each community for the rest of the U.S.
Thank you very much, Mr. Begich.
Well, I do think campaigning physically, in person, throughout the state is important. It's why I'm here. I'm here because I think it's important to be here. You cannot represent the people of Alaska if you're not willing to meet the people of Alaska. And that was a unique value that Don Young had on his campaigns, as he would always focus on Southeast when he was coming back to the state. This was his first stop. Since I've been campaigning, I've been in Juneau multiple times, probably 5, 6 times. I've been in Ketchikan 4 times. I've been in Haines twice. I've been in Petersburg. I've been in Sitka, Wrangell, Cordova, Kodiak. Why? Because it's important. Because we talk about Southeast, but the communities of Southeast are actually different from one another too. And you can't represent the needs of those communities if you're not meeting with the people of those communities. So that's been important to me. It's why every single day I'm out there on the campaign trail. I'm meeting the people of Alaska, not just in Southeast, but throughout the entire state. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, you can see how someone is likely to work in Congress based on how they're working on the campaign, right? Are they out there every single day? Are they working every single day? Are they showing up? Because that's what it's going to take in the Congress to advance the interests of Alaska in a meaningful and demonstrable way. Sitting through 8 to 10 hours of committee meetings, showing up for votes late at night, and then getting on a plane and coming back home so that you can be here for a day only to return back to DC. That's what it takes, day in and day out. I'm prepared to do that for you. I'm prepared to do that for you because I'm passionate about the opportunities that the state of Alaska represents and the spirit of Alaska that we represent, the people in this room and the people that are outside this room. I believe, again, that Alaska has the answer to so many of our nation's challenges. I want to be that representative for you, that evangelist for you in the Congress, representing our interests to DC so that we can answer so many of these our nation's challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. And we very much appreciate both of you engaging the region and taking the time to be here today. Would you please give them both a round of applause? Appreciation.
Thank you.
So that concludes our candidates forum. It's been a very enlightening time, and we really appreciate that. We're going to take a short break. We've got a lot more great content ahead, so if we can get here just a few minutes before the top of the hour, we will get back to our next topic. So, Governor Palin, thank you so much for beaming in, and we'll look forward to seeing you here in Southeast again soon. Mr. Begich, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you guys. Thanks.